Hi, I'm Matt Harlow from DJ Case and Associates, and today Drew Malinak, a social scientist here at DJ Case, is going to talk to us about learning styles and how an understanding of how different people learn can make you a better teacher for your new adult hunters and anglers. Take it away, Drew.
Hi, my name is Drew Malinak, and I'm a social scientist with DJ Case and Associates. Today's lesson is going to be on learning styles. Let's get into it. The first thing I want you to do is to actually do an exercise. I want you to describe the typical participants that are in the training programs that you all currently put on or supervise. The next thing I want you to do is describe the attendees you would like to see attending your Locavore programs. We'll stop the video now and you can do that exercise. All right, now that you have written down the typical participants and you've described the attendees you'd like to see attending in your Locavore program, let's talk about what the research shows. So these are your agency's typical customers, right? They're going to be white, they're going to usually be male, they're usually probably going to be a baby boomer, and you're probably going to have children who grew up in the outdoors that you're teaching as well. Let's talk about the new customers that we're trying to attract and that are becoming a growing population. They're going to be more racially diverse, they're going to be more female, they're going to be younger, think about millennials, they're going to be more urban, more educated, and they're not going to be raised outdoors. And so why are we talking about learning styles in the first place? It's a fair question. So as you're probably familiar with, and as we talked about in a previous lesson, this is the ORAM, or the Outdoor Recreation Adoption Model, which essentially says we have three stages. We have recruitment, retention, reactivation. Well, it's important to understand that as one goes along this process of the R3s, that their self-identification as a hunter and angler increases throughout this process. However, when starting out, when first becoming aware, becoming interested in doing the trial, the risk of quitting is greatest at the beginning. And as they start to learn more and to identify more as a hunter and angler, their risk of quitting will decrease. But you can see there in the middle, that's where they cross and that's their decision to continue on. And so this part here is where we're really focused on in trying to lower the risk of quitting and increasing the chances that they're going to self-identify as a hunter. So this teaching them about how to be a hunter, how to be an angler is a really important process, and there's a high risk of them dropping out. And so it's important to understand that many of your educational programs are designed and geared towards young adults or children. But for these late onset anglers and hunters, they're going to be adults. And so it's important to understand this is a different way to teach. And so we're going to look to Malcolm Knowles, who is a central figure in U.S. education in the United States. And he came up with a theory of andragogy in 1973, which beforehand, all education had really been based on pedagogy, so how to teach young adults or children. And what Malcolm Knowles found is there's really 6 principles for andragogy. One is the need to know. So adults need to understand the information that they're learning and why they need to learn it, versus children where in school it's just you need to learn because. There's this idea of self-concept where they really prefer a self-directed approach to allow self-discovery on their own. This is also different from children. And then experts are really more partners in their learning journey. It's not so much as I'm the teacher, you're the student, but we're going to work through this together. The third concept is the role of personal experiences. Adults understand that using past experience is important to put new information in context, and that trial and error is really an accepted basis of learning. The fourth principle is the readiness to learn. So adults come into a learning experience much more ready to learn than children. I think we could all agree on that intuitively. Orientation learning. So adults are really life-centered. What they want to understand is how what they're learning can help them in their everyday life. How does it solve the issues they have in their lives? And again, coming back to motivation, they're motivated more by internal pressures to think of like self-esteem, quality of life, more than external motivators like job and salary. And so what does this mean for adult learning sessions? So expect different levels of skills and experience. It's not just everyone's in 6th grade, everyone's 12. It's going to be, 25-year-old, 40-year-old, 30-year-old, lots of different levels of skills and experiences in the outdoors. Tell them why the information they're learning is useful for them. and solicit personal experiences to relate the lessons back to. And then review previous material at the beginning of class and assign outside resources for self-direction and so that they can learn on their own. And finally, reflect on out-of-classroom experiences. Again, relate their past experiences back to what they're learning. So now we're going to talk about the different learning styles of generations. And the first thing I really want you to know up front is this is really not important. And the reason being is that the differences are really not reliable, or they're too difficult to reconcile between one generation and the other. And they're often based on anecdotes, and they really fail to be generalized once you put them to the test. And frankly, you're probably going to be teaching multiple generations. And so it's going to be difficult to change your class for each generational needs rather than finding an overall strategy. And so what is important that we want you to focus on is the differences in technological experience and preferences, and the differences in general learning styles. We want you to focus on common educational needs that go across all generations. The next thing we're going to talk about is the 4 styles of general learning. And so the first one is visual, where people learn visually, right? They're process demonstrated step by step. They enjoy live or video demonstrations, and the traditional class notes may not be as effective for them. Then we have auditory, so they learn by listening, participate by asking questions. That helps to record lectures, and so they can go back and listen to them. Then there's kinesthetic. We learn best by doing tasks, trial and error. And finally, reading and writing, self-explanatory. They learn best by reading and writing, and their preference for word displayed information. And so now we want to talk about a single model for multi-stylistic learning that you can use in your courses for all these different learning styles. And so the first aspect is to make different tools available for people's needs. We're talking lectures, demonstrations, hands-on activities, reading, and videos. And furthermore, using kind of micro-size and modular bits of information. So short bits that they can then absorb, and then you can combine them for a broader program. And then you really need to connect to learners' goals. So learn about who they are. And that's the best way to recommend the right resources they need at the right time. And finally, mobile access, videos, ebooks, audiobooks, allow them the ability to consume this knowledge at their leisure. Finally, using lecture printouts to enhance note-taking is always a good idea. Homework, practice, and again, online resources, allowing them to access this information in different ways, and also depending on their technological savviness. So now we're going to talk about gender differences when teaching, particularly when teaching women outdoor skills. So what we found through a series of focus groups over a number of projects is that women do prefer a greater emphasis on learning environment safety. And specifically, we're talking about bodily injuries. So, hunting accidents, somebody potentially accidentally getting shot, or a hook in the hand when you're pulling your fish out of the water. But then there's also this fear of gender-based violence as a woman going into these places alone, or even with friends. And finally, ridicule. This mostly comes from males, and it's a sense that kind of makes women prefer women teachers because there's this sense of embarrassment that I don't know these skills, and frankly, men are bad about ridiculing them for that. If you are going to have male teachers, it's really important to not have any sort of shred of ridicule, and to understand that they may not know the same information you do. And finally, trial and error might be preferred by them as well as cooperation over competition. And these are important to understand. Now we're going to talk about culture or race-related learning differences. There was a series of studies done by Lisa Guion and Nicole Walker down in University of Florida, where they looked at creating culturally sensitive lessons. And what they found were that there are very big differences between mainstream American values, that's generally white American values, and diverse American values, so people of color from different cultures and races. So mainstream American values, for an example, when you talk about competition and individual achievement, on the flip side of that, for diverse American, you're talking more cooperation, teamwork, group achievement. That's what's seen as more important. Again, nature dominance, nature harmony, nuclear emphasis of the family with mainstream American values, so your immediate family and your household, versus diverse American values, we're talking extended family emphasis. So not just your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, but also your aunts and uncles, cousins, grandfather, so on and so forth. Mainstream American values, you're talking about independence, individuality. Diverse American values, more interdependence. So the group first kind of mentality. These are all kind of examples of differences between essentially white mainstream culture and diverse American values. And I'd really encourage you to look at the source that's going to be in the video below, the planning programs to break down culture barriers, to really dig into this a little bit more to make your program better. Lastly, we're going to talk about education and subject matter differences amongst your participants. So it's best to assume only slight familiarity with the outdoors and food preparation just because of the vast different levels of experience you're going to have in your class. It's best to keep your vocabulary at a 6th grade level for the education levels. And it's best to avoid conservation jargon, things like R3, swap, CRP, accession, and avoid brand names as a reference to a type of product. Avoid hunter, angler slang, things like inside spread, Texas rig, bug dope, and pass out a glossary of terms at the beginning of class so people are kind of on the same footing at the beginning. And then when you do come to those terms, be sure to define them so that everyone understands what they mean. And so now we come to our final exercise. How should you change your program? So based on the differences in learning style we just talked about, what are the top 5 changes you need to make in your current program to make it more inclusive? So list what you would change and why.